Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The Silent Desolation ***. The shattered remnants of the starship drifted like forgotten debris in the vastness of space. Once an elegant vessel of gold and steel, it was now a lifeless wreck, its hull scorched and dented from a violent battle with an unknown enemy. Inside the ship, there was nothing but eerie silence, except for the faint hum of malfunctioning machinery. Among the wreckage, a single figure lay slumped against the remains of an ornate throne, her once glorious gown now tattered and stained with blood. She was old, her features weathered by age and time, and her long silver hair cascaded in tangled waves across her shoulders. Her once beautiful alien form was now marred by wounds, deep cuts along her arms and legs, burns across her face, and an unmistakable expression of abandonment in her eyes. Her name was Elisera, and she had once been the queen of the Zalaxian Empire. Now she was nothing more than a forgotten relic, left to die in the cold void of space after her husband, the king, betrayed her. The betrayal had come not through words, but through the brutal cruelty of his actions. After years of marriage, the king had cast her aside, deeming her too weak, too old, too irrelevant for the future of his empire. She had fought to survive, clinging to the remnants of her dignity and pride, but now, all she had left was the agonizing pain of her wounds and the suffocating loneliness of the cold emptiness around her. The last of her kind, the last of her royal bloodline, lay at death's door and no one cared. Suddenly the stillness was broken. A flicker of light appeared in the distance, growing larger with each passing second. Elisara's faded, tired eyes barely registered the approach of the small spacecraft, its engines humming steadily as it drew closer. She had no hope that it was anyone who could help, but she had no strength to move, to escape, or even to hide. Her fate had already been sealed by her husband's cruel neglect. The ship touched down gently on the hull of the wreck, its door opening with a hiss. A figure emerged, clad in the sleek, dark armor of a human soldier. The figure's helmet obscured his face, but his stance was resolute, his eyes scanning the wreckage with practiced precision. The soldier, Captain Marcus Kane, had been on a routine patrol when the distress signal from the derelict Zalaxian ship had reached his ship's systems. Initially, he had assumed it was another trap set by the Zalaxians or an abandoned vessel with no survivors. He couldn't have been more wrong. His boots clanged lightly against the cold metal floor as he made his way through the ruined corridors of the ship. The faint sound of breathing led him to the royal chamber, where he stopped dead in his tracks. There, in the midst of the destruction, lay the former queen. Her beauty was undeniable, even in her weakened state, and the story of her abandonment was etched into every line of her face. He knelt beside her, his hand reaching out to check her pulse. It was weak but still there. "Hold on," Marcus muttered to himself. He hadn't expected to find anyone alive, let alone a figure of such importance. But his duty was clear. He was a soldier and he couldn't let her die alone no matter who she was. Gently, he lifted her fragile body into his arms, supporting her with a tenderness that contrasted with the coldness of his military demeanor. Her eyelids fluttered open, and her voice came out in a barely audible whisper. Who are you?" she rasped, her voice cracked with years of suffering. "I'm Captain Marcus Kane," he replied, his tone steady but warm. "I'm here to get you out of here." Elisera blinked, confusion clouding her vision. The humanity of the soldier before her seemed both strange and comforting. She had heard stories of humans, brave, tenacious, and relentless, but she never thought she would find one willing to help someone like her. A queen who had been cast aside, a woman broken by the very empire she had once ruled. "The king," she murmured weakly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "He left me to die." Marcus stiffened at the mention of her husband. He had heard rumors of the Zalaxian Empire's ruthlessness, but this was something else entirely. The king had abandoned her to die on the wreckage of their once proud ship. His anger flared, but he quickly reined it in. This wasn't the time to dwell on the actions of an alien king. He had a mission to complete. "We'll get you to safety," he said, his voice firm, but there was a quiet resolve in his eyes. He would make sure that no one was left to die alone in the void of space, especially not someone so broken by betrayal. He carried her carefully back to his ship, where the doors closed behind them with a soft whoosh. The ship's engines roared to life as they blasted away from the wreckage, leaving the cold, abandoned ship behind. As they made their way toward a nearby human station, Elisera felt her consciousness slipping in and out. She had never imagined a human would rescue her, and the touch of kindness from Captain Kane was both foreign and overwhelming. The unknown soldier ***. The hum of the ship's engines was a constant, soothing presence as Marcus Kane navigated the small craft through the empty stretches of space. His eyes never left the controls in front of him, but his mind wasn't on the task at hand. It was on her, the abandoned queen he had rescued from the wreckage. Elisara lay on the medbay cot, her pale form swathed in blankets, hooked up to a basic life support system. Her breaths were shallow but steady, the machines monitoring her condition flashing green. As he glanced over at her from time to time, he wondered how someone like her, someone so powerful in her past life, could be reduced to such fragility. He had heard the stories of the Zalaxians, how their empire was as vast and unyielding as their warriors were ruthless, but never once had he imagined encountering a member of their royal family in such a vulnerable state. The memory of the way she had looked, slumped in the throne room of her ruined ship, haunted him. But what haunted him more was the question of why she had been left there to die. The king, her husband, the one who had sworn to protect and cherish her, had abandoned her. Marcus couldn't reconcile the brutal indifference of that act with the beauty of the woman who lay before him. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft hiss of the door to the medbay opening. He turned to see her, eyes weakly open, blinking against the bright lights overhead. Are you still here?" she asked, her voice hoarse and cracked like the sound of dry leaves rustling. Marcus stood up from his seat by the control panel and moved toward her. His footsteps were quiet on the metal floor, and though his posture was rigid, there was a sense of care in the way he approached her. "I'm still here," he replied, his voice soft but steady. "And I'll be here until you're safe." Elisara gazed at him with a look of incredulity. She had once ruled an empire, commanded fleets, and enjoyed the finest luxuries the universe had to offer. She had never thought she would be in this position, dependent on the mercy of a human soldier. His simple promise, though, brought a flicker of something unfamiliar to her: hope. "I never thought anyone would come for me," she murmured, her lips trembling slightly. "Not after what happened." "I'm not here to judge your past," Marcus said, sitting beside her on the bed. He kept a respectful distance, though there was an unspoken bond between them, a recognition of shared vulnerability. "I'm here to make sure you get the help you need. That's all." Elisara stared at him for a moment, studying his features, though her vision was still clouded by pain. She had seen soldiers like him before, human soldiers, fierce and resourceful. But there was something about this one that stood out. There was a warmth in his eyes, a quiet empathy that spoke volumes about his character. He wasn't just any soldier. He was different. "You are human," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you help someone like me?" Marcus tilted his head, his brow furrowing slightly. "Does it matter that I'm human? A person in need is a person in need. I help where I can." Elisara found herself struggling to hold on to the bitter emotions that had built up over the years. The bitterness towards her people, her betrayal by the one person she had once loved. It was hard to release, to forgive even the smallest transgression, but there was something in this soldier's demeanor that made her question everything. The small, makeshift medbay was silent for a long time, save for the soft beeping of the monitors. Elisara took slow, shallow breaths, trying to gather her strength. Finally she spoke again. "Why did you come for me?" Her voice was stronger now, the underlying defiance in it unmistakable. "I don't leave people behind," Marcus replied simply. "I don't care who they are, where they come from, or what their past is. If someone needs help, I do what I can." Elisara's expression softened, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a small smile, fragile but genuine, formed on her lips. "You are nothing like the ones who abandoned me," she said quietly. "You have honor." Marcus paused, the words settling around him like an unfamiliar weight. He hadn't thought much about honor when he made the decision to rescue her. It was just what felt right. But hearing it from her, someone who had once commanded armies, made him realize that the choice had been more than just an instinctual one. "Honor doesn't change the past," he said, standing and turning toward the ship's controls. "But it can shape the future." Elisara stared at his back, watching him work. She wasn't used to being treated as an equal, to having someone show her this kind of care. Her entire life had been built on power, on command and conquest. Yet here she was, a broken queen, utterly dependent on the mercy of a stranger. "Where are we going?" she asked after a moment, her voice more controlled now. "A human station on the edge of the system," Marcus replied. "It's not much, but it's the closest place we can go for help." Elisara considered his words, then glanced out the small window at the stars rushing by. She had spent her life among them, navigating politics and battles, yet she felt as though she were seeing them for the first time. Something about the cold emptiness of space felt less oppressive now. The thought that there might be a future, one where she wasn't alone, was strange, almost too much to bear. But perhaps, just perhaps, this soldier, this human, could be the beginning of something different. "I never thought I would need help," Elisara said, her voice distant. "I never thought I would be so weak." Marcus glanced at her from the corner of his eye, his gaze softening. "Strength doesn't come from not needing help. It comes from knowing when to ask for it." Her eyes met his, and in them she saw not pity but something else, something she hadn't expected: respect. In that moment, a strange bond began to form between them. It wasn't based on power or position but on shared humanity, something that transcended race, species, and history. Elisara had been cast aside, abandoned, left to die in the cold void. But now here she was, rescued not by her own kind but by a human soldier who had risked his life for someone like her. An unexpected bond. The human station Marcus had mentioned loomed in the distance, a small but well-equipped outpost on the fringes of known space, far from the grand political machinations of the larger empires. It was a quiet, humble place, known for offering sanctuary to those who needed it, whether they be refugees, travelers, or soldiers like Marcus who needed rest after a long campaign. It wasn't much, but for someone like Elisara, it was more than she had hoped for. The journey had been long, and her wounds still ached, but the steady hum of the ship and the presence of the soldier beside her brought a sense of calm to her turbulent thoughts. For the first time in years, Elisara felt like she might survive, not just physically but in a deeper sense. She wasn't just a pawn in a game anymore. She wasn't just an object to be discarded. She was a person again. The ship descended into the docking bay with ease, and Marcus helped her out of her seat, assisting her down the narrow corridor towards the airlock. The outpost wasn't grand, but it was a sanctuary for those who didn't belong anywhere else. It had the faint smell of recycled air and sterile metal, but there was something comforting about the simplicity of it all. As the door slid open, a pair of station medics approached them, their uniforms marked with the insignia of the small, independent facility. They were human too, though their eyes lingered on Elisara with a mix of surprise and curiosity. The alien woman, despite her tattered appearance, still carried the faintest aura of royalty, something regal in the way she moved, in the remnants of her elegance. "Captain Kane," one of the medics said, his tone warm but professional. "We weren't expecting you to bring in anyone." "I wasn't expecting to find anyone either," Marcus replied, his voice gruff but kind. "She's in bad shape. Get her the best treatment you can." Without another word, the medics ushered Elisara onto a gurney, where they immediately began to tend to her injuries. She winced as they cleaned her wounds, her eyes betraying a momentary flash of vulnerability, but she said nothing. She had been through worse in her life. Much worse. Yet there was something about this place, about these people, that made her feel cared for. That feeling was foreign, strange, almost unsettling. Marcus stood by, watching as the medics worked efficiently. He couldn't help but feel a surge of protectiveness. There was a raw, wounded beauty to her that he hadn't fully understood until now. She wasn't just the queen of a fallen empire, she was a woman who had been betrayed, cast aside, and left to die. He didn't know why he felt such a strong need to see her safe, but he did. There was no question about it. She had become something more to him in these short hours. A person who had been abandoned by the very world she had once ruled. Once Elisara had been stabilized, the medics left her in the care of a nearby room in the station's medical bay. The room was simple but comfortable, a far cry from the cold, impersonal luxury she had once known as the queen. Yet, as she lay on the bed recovering from the pain and shock, she couldn't help but find comfort in the unfamiliar. The steady pulse of the heart monitor, the quiet beep of the equipment, the soft rustle of the station's automated systems, it all felt safe. As Marcus stood outside the room, he found himself hesitating. He had done what he could to get her here, to make sure she was safe, but now the question lingered. What next? What was he supposed to do with her? He had no answers. He was just a soldier trained to fight, to follow orders. But helping her? This was new territory for him. He looked up as the door slid open and one of the medics, a young woman with short, dark hair, stepped out. "She's stable," the medic reported, glancing at Marcus. "She'll need rest, but I think she'll pull through." Marcus nodded. "Good. Thanks." The medic lingered for a moment, her gaze flicking to the door of the room where Elisara lay. "She's not just any alien, is she?" Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "No. She's the queen of the Zalaxian Empire. Or was. She was left behind by her own people, abandoned to die." The medic raised an eyebrow. "The Zalaxian queen?" "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice quiet. I didn't know what I was getting into when I found her, but I couldn't just leave her there. Not like that. There was a long pause as the medic seemed to digest this information. Finally she spoke again. I don't know what the future holds for her. But you did the right thing. People like her don't get many second chances. Marcus nodded, but the weight of the words lingered. What was the future for Elisera? The Zalaxian Empire had fallen from its peak, but it still held power and influence. Would her return to health mean she would try to reclaim her position? Or would she remain in the shadows, a relic of a forgotten past? And more importantly, what did it mean for him? Someone who had been trained to fight in wars, not to become entangled in the destinies of fallen queens? Before he could dwell on it further, the sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Elisera was standing in the doorway, supported by a thick robe that was far too large for her thin frame. Her eyes were heavy with the aftermath of sleep, but there was a determination in the way she held herself. Thank you for saving me, she said, her voice steady, though still hoarse from the exertion of speaking. She looked up at Marcus, the expression on her face a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something harder to name. Marcus nodded, but he didn't speak immediately. He didn't know what to say. There was a silence between them, comfortable but thick with unspoken words. You don't have to stay with me, she continued, her gaze flickering down. You've done more than enough. I can't ask more of you. Marcus's expression softened, and for a moment, his usual military demeanor faltered. He had come to the station to drop her off, to make sure she was safe. But now, seeing her standing there, vulnerable but strong in her own right, something inside him shifted. It was a feeling he couldn't quite explain, a pull that seemed stronger than the rules of duty or logic. You're not alone, he said finally, his voice low. Not anymore. Elisera met his eyes, her gaze searching. She had been betrayed by so many in her life. Could she trust this human soldier who had risked everything to save her? Or was this kindness another fleeting illusion? The burden of the past ***. Days passed on the human station, and as Elisera recovered, the physical wounds that had marred her body slowly began to heal. The medics had done their job well, and the sharp pain that had once consumed her subsided into a dull ache. Her strength returned bit by bit, though it was clear that she was not yet the regal figure she once was. Her limbs were thin, her face gaunt, and her once pristine skin was still dotted with the remnants of burns and cuts. But her mind, though fractured by the trauma of her past, began to clear as well. The bitter fog of betrayal had started to lift, though the scars of the emotional wounds remained. In the quiet solitude of her room, Elisera found herself contemplating her past. The golden halls of the Zalaxian palace seemed like a lifetime ago. She remembered the days of opulence, the endless feasts, the whispers of courtiers eager to please her, the endless parade of suitors and allies vying for her favor. She had been a queen, a woman of power, beloved by many. But it had all come crashing down in an instant. Her mind flickered back to the last days on her homeworld, the cold, calculated dismissal of her husband, the king. The memories were still vivid, still sharp, as though they had been branded into her soul. She could see him now, King Taloth, tall, proud, his dark skin and silver eyes filled with a coldness that had once been a source of her admiration. He had been the embodiment of Zalaxian strength, a ruler who commanded loyalty with just a glance. Yet when she had aged, when her body had betrayed her once pristine form, when the council had whispered that she was no longer a symbol of power, Taloth had been quick to cast her aside. You are no longer fit to stand by my side, Elisera, he had said, his words cutting deeper than any blade. Your time has passed. You will be a burden to the Empire. Leave or be forgotten. That had been the last time she had seen him. Her heart had shattered, but there had been no time for grief. She had been sent to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, left to die alone in the wreckage of the starship. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Enter, Elisera said, her voice still carrying the weight of years of command. The door slid open and Marcus Kane stepped into the room, his presence steady and comforting. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held a warmth that had become familiar over the days they had spent together. She had grown accustomed to his company, and in many ways, he had become her anchor in the storm of her emotions. There was no pretension in him, no arrogance, just a quiet, grounded strength that somehow gave her the space to breathe. I thought you might like to take a walk, Marcus said, his voice soft yet firm. It's a nice day outside the station. It might help you clear your mind. Elisera hesitated for a moment. The idea of walking among the stars, of seeing something outside the sterile walls of the station, was tempting. But she was not sure she was ready. The memories of her past were still too raw, and being alone with her thoughts felt like a dangerous venture. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do now." Marcus's gaze softened. He stepped closer to her, though he kept a respectful distance. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. Take things one step at a time. You've already come so far." Elisara looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But there was nothing there, nothing except a quiet understanding. She nodded slowly, allowing herself to trust him just for a moment. "All right. A walk sounds good." Marcus's lips twitched upward in a faint smile, and he gestured toward the door. "I'll be here if you need anything. No pressure." Elisara rose from the bed, feeling the pull of gravity beneath her as she stood. She was still weak, but with each passing day her body was growing stronger. She slid into a simple robe the station had provided and followed Marcus out of the room, into the station's narrow corridors. The outside world, though small and distant from the great expanse of her former empire, felt strangely liberating. The station's walls were lined with large windows, offering a view of the galaxy beyond. Elisara found herself stopping at one of the windows, gazing out at the stars. She hadn't realized how much she missed the sight of them, the infinite, distant beauty that had once been her domain. Marcus stood beside her, not speaking, simply giving her the space she needed. After a long moment she finally spoke, her voice low and thoughtful. "I used to rule an empire," she said softly, almost as though speaking to herself. "I once commanded fleets, held court in the grandest halls, and lived among the stars like they were my subjects. But now I am a ghost." "You're not a ghost," Marcus replied gently. "You're a survivor." Elisara shook her head slowly. "A survivor, yes. But what is a survivor without a purpose? My people are gone. My king has forgotten me. What am I without them?" Marcus paused before answering, his voice calm but resolute. "You're more than your past, Elisara. You're more than what you've lost. You're still here. And that means there's still something for you to do. A future, maybe?" Elisara turned to look at him, her dark eyes searching his face. She had never thought about the future in those terms. She had always been defined by her past, by her role as a queen. But now, standing here in this small foreign place, with nothing but the weight of time on her shoulders, she realized that Marcus might be right. The future was still hers to shape. "You really think that?" she asked, her voice quiet but full of vulnerability. "I do," Marcus said, his eyes steady and sincere. "I've seen people who've lost everything, people who thought they had no place left in the world. But they found a way forward. And so can you." Elisara felt a strange stirring inside her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. It was hope, fragile and faint, but it was there. For the first time since the fall of her empire, she considered the possibility of a new beginning, not as the queen of an ancient race, but as a person who had the strength to rise again. The shadow of the past ***. The days on the station passed like fleeting moments. Elisara grew stronger, physically and mentally, though her recovery was slow. She spent most of her time in her room or walking the station's small halls, where she found the silence almost comforting. The walls were lined with photographs of the human settlers, family portraits, pictures of landscapes, starscapes, reminders that life, no matter how different from her own, still moved forward. Marcus was a constant presence in her life now, though their interactions remained quiet, even routine. He didn't ask too many questions, didn't pry into her past. Yet she knew that he was waiting for her to speak, to tell him the story of who she had been before the fall. And every time her thoughts wandered to her past, her fall from grace, the cold betrayal by her husband, the rage and bitterness that had consumed her, she felt the weight of it pressed down on her chest. It was easier to stay silent. Yet, as the days stretched on, Elisara knew something was changing. There was something in the way Marcus looked at her, in the way he treated her as more than a fallen queen. There was respect in his eyes now, not pity, not curiosity, but respect. He had been patient with her, given her the space she needed. She had learned that he was a man of few words but deep understanding, and slowly she found herself opening up to him in ways she had not expected. But despite the new bond between them, Elisara still couldn't shake the nagging fear that her past would one day catch up with her. She had been abandoned by her people, exiled by the very ones she had once ruled. And though Marcus had saved her, she couldn't erase the part of her that feared being thrown away again. One evening, as the station drifted peacefully through the cosmos, Marcus came to her room again. She had been sitting by the small window, staring out into the blackness, when she heard his knock at the door. "Elisara," he called gently. "I think it's time we talked." She turned toward him, her heart quickening. She had been expecting this moment, she had felt it coming. Yet, a part of her wanted to resist, wanted to shut herself off and protect the fragile peace she had found here. She knew what he would ask. He would ask about the Zalaxian Empire, about the king who had discarded her. He would want answers that she wasn't sure she could give. "You want to know what happened," she said quietly, her voice tinged with resignation. Marcus hesitated before nodding, his expression unreadable. "I don't want to push you. But I can't help you if I don't know what we're up against." She studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his intentions. She knew he wasn't asking out of curiosity or to satisfy a need for information. He wanted to understand. To know how to protect her, if not from physical harm, then from the ghosts of her past that still haunted her. "I'll tell you," Elisara said softly. "But you have to promise me that you won't look at me differently after." Marcus's brows furrowed slightly, confusion flickering in his eyes. "I don't understand. You think I'll judge you?" "I don't know," she replied, her gaze falling to the floor. I think I'm afraid of what I'll become when I say it out loud. I don't want to be that woman anymore." Marcus took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're not that woman anymore. You're here. You're not the past. You're just you." Elisara's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, the words felt like a lifeline thrown to her in a storm. She hadn't realized how desperately she had needed to hear them until now. "All right," she said, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "I'll tell you." She took a slow, steadying breath and began. "The Zalaxian Empire was vast, far-reaching. We ruled many worlds and our power was unmatched. We, the royal family, were the embodiment of that power. And I was the queen. I married King Taloth when I was young, full of hope and ambition. He was the perfect match for me, or so I thought. He was strong, respected, and he had the kind of cold intelligence that made him a brilliant ruler. I thought we would rule together forever." Elisara paused, her mind momentarily lost in the memories. She had once been so certain of her place in the universe, so sure of the path that had been laid out for her. But the crash of that certainty had shaken her to her core. But as time passed, things began to change. Taloth, he began to see me differently. My youth faded, and I could feel his affection turning to something colder, more transactional. The empire had begun to fracture, and the council, those parasites who had always been waiting for an opportunity, began whispering in his ear. They said I was weak, that I was no longer a symbol of strength. They said I was aging. Her voice broke slightly, the bitterness creeping into her words. He abandoned me. No warning. No mercy. Just cold, ruthless indifference. The council approved. They said it was for the good of the empire. That I was too old, too broken. He sent me away to die on a remote ship, far from the heart of the empire. No one came for me. And I was left there, alone, to waste away. Marcus's expression softened, though his eyes were filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. He could sense the pain in her words, the anguish that still lingered behind her guarded exterior. "You've had to carry that weight all on your own?" he asked, his voice low. Elisara nodded, a small, bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I didn't have much choice. I was exiled, thrown away like a discarded relic. But I survived. I always survive." There was silence for a long moment as Marcus absorbed her story. He stepped closer, his hand resting gently on the wall beside her, not quite touching but offering a silent solidarity. "You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore," he said quietly. Elisara's eyes met his, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to let go of the weight of her past, if only just a little. She wasn't sure what her future would hold, but for the first time, she could see the possibility of something more. Unlikely alliances ***. The weeks that followed were quiet, but something had shifted between Elisara and Marcus. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, something deeper than mere duty or compassion. Elisara had come to realize that she no longer had to carry her past alone. And though she was still uncertain about her future, the weight felt a little less heavy with Marcus at her side. However, peace, as they both knew, could never last long. The universe had a way of pulling the past into the present, and for all her desire to rebuild, Elisara couldn't escape the fact that her fall from grace had consequences. It wasn't just her past that haunted her, it was the future, the possibility of what would come if her enemies ever found her. They wouldn't simply leave her be. The Zalaxian Empire was vast, and its political games had no end. Elisara found herself thinking more often of the enemies she had once known, of the conspiracies that had run beneath the surface of her royal life. Those who had once whispered behind her back, the counselors who had betrayed her, still held power in the Empire. And if they thought she was still alive, they would stop at nothing to silence her. One evening, as the station's lights dimmed, Marcus returned from a brief mission outside the station, his expression tense. Elisera noticed the shift in his demeanor immediately, the way his eyes flickered with something deeper, something troubling. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice calm but alert. Marcus met her gaze and hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "I've been in contact with a few of my people from the military. There's been a development." Elisara's heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting something like this. The reach of the Zalaxian Empire was long, and if anyone were to find her, it would be through those who had once been close to her. "What kind of development?" "Intel has come through," Marcus said, his voice lowered. "A faction of the Zalaxian Council has made it clear that they believe you survived. They think you're still out there." Elisara's breath caught in her throat. She had feared this moment, but hearing it confirmed out loud made the reality hit harder than she anticipated. "And what do they want?" "They want you dead," Marcus replied flatly. "They want you erased, and they'll stop at nothing to make sure that happens." A chill ran through Elisara's spine. The council had never been forgiving, but this was different. This wasn't just a political move. This was personal. Her death would solidify the power of those who had betrayed her, those who had abandoned her to die. "Then we need to leave," she said, her voice firm. "We can't stay here. If they know I'm alive, they'll come for me." Marcus shook his head. "It's not that simple. They've already sent ships to this sector. We have a limited window to act before they catch up to us." Elisara's thoughts raced. If the council had discovered her survival, they would be relentless. Her royal bloodline might have once been a symbol of power, but now it was a threat to the new order. They would send fleets to track her down, use every resource at their disposal to capture her. "But we can't just run," Marcus said, his voice soft but intense. "You're not just some fugitive, Elisera. You're a queen. And we have a chance to fight back. Not just for you but for everyone who's been oppressed under that regime." Her eyes met his, and for the first time she saw something else in him, something more than compassion. There was fire there, a willingness to stand beside her not because it was his duty, but because he believed in her. There was a weight in his words, a sense of urgency, that told her he was ready to do whatever it took. "Fight back?" Elisera repeated, her mind turning. "You're suggesting we reclaim the Empire? It's a broken thing, Marcus. What's left of it is ruled by tyrants." "Not everything is lost," Marcus said. "You were their queen once, Elisera. You still have supporters, loyalists who remember you. There are factions within the Empire, underground groups, who have been waiting for someone like you to return." Elisara's chest tightened. She had lived through too much betrayal to believe in that kind of hope. But Marcus was right about one thing: she had always been a symbol. Even in her exile, the memory of her reign had lingered. And if she could rally even a small portion of those who still remembered her, maybe there was a way to destabilize the council. Maybe, just maybe, she could begin to rebuild what had been lost. "How do we even start?" she asked, her voice quiet but determined. "I've been abandoned. My allies are gone. You have me," Marcus said, his gaze unwavering. "And you have your own strength. You might not feel like it right now, but you're still a queen, Elisera. You have a power inside you that no one can take away." For a moment, the weight of his words hung in the air, and Elisera felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Not the false hope of a naive young woman dreaming of a grand future, but a deep, resilient understanding of what she could do if she fought for it. She straightened, taking a deep breath. "All right. What's the first step?" Marcus smiled, the corner of his lips curling into something that felt like determination, like an unspoken promise. "I'll contact the resistance groups I've been working with. There's a network of sympathizers who still believe in the old ways. They'll help us if they know you're alive. But we need to be careful. The council spies are everywhere. We can't trust anyone except those we can verify." Elisera nodded, her mind already racing with the possibilities. She had been a queen once, and while the council may have destroyed her empire, they had underestimated her. She was not so easily vanquished. She had learned how to survive, how to navigate the treacherous politics of her world. She had faced death, but now for the first time she saw a chance to rise again, not as the broken relic of the past, but as a force to be reckoned with. "Then we'll do it," Elisera said, her voice resolute. "We'll take back what's mine." Marcus's smile widened, and there was a fire in his eyes now, an eagerness that matched her own. Together they would do whatever it took to survive, to fight, and to build something new. The past might still haunt them, but the future was theirs to shape, The reclamation asterisk asterisk. The station hummed quietly in the void, a cold, indifferent witness to the events unfolding within it. Elisara stood before a console, her hand steady as she reviewed the encrypted messages Marcus had managed to retrieve from his military contacts. The resistance groups, the factions still loyal to her, had begun to mobilize. It was strange knowing that there were still those out there who remembered her, who believed in the ideals she had once fought for. She had thought they were all lost, scattered to the winds with the fall of the Zalaxian Empire. But now, as she studied the coordinates of hidden bases and safe houses, she realized how wrong she had been. They were out there waiting. And they would be her first allies in this new war. Marcus was beside her, his presence a grounding force in the chaos swirling within her mind. He had been with her through the darkest of moments, and now, as they prepared for the next step, his loyalty felt like a promise she could no longer ignore. He had given her a second chance at life, and now she would not waste it. They would take back what had been stolen from her. These coordinates, Elisara said, tapping a few keys on the console to bring up a map. They're all within reach. But we'll need more than just our combined forces. The Council will come for us once they know we've moved. They won't let us rally any real power without sending everything they have to crush us. Marcus looked at the map, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scope of their plan. That's why we need to act fast. We hit the first base, recruit the rest, and then we strike before they have time to retaliate. If we do it right, we might even be able to throw them off track. Elisara nodded, though a pang of doubt still lingered in her chest. The resistance groups, while numerous, were fractured. It had been years since they had acted as a unified force. There were those who still believed in her, but there were also factions with their own agendas, their own goals. She couldn't trust them all, not yet. We start with the Phylaxian resistance, Elisara said, her voice determined. They were the last group I communicated with before I was exiled. They were loyal to me even after everything. If they can be trusted, we can form the first line of our rebellion. Marcus gave a sharp nod. I'll make the arrangements. We leave at dawn. The next few hours passed in a flurry of preparations. Marcus contacted his allies within the military, securing the necessary resources, shuttles, weaponry, and secure communication channels. Elisara spent her time reviewing old battle strategies, familiarizing herself with the latest intel, and ensuring that the resistance groups would be ready to act the moment she gave the command. By the time dawn came, the station was alive with the quiet tension of impending action. Marcus stood ready at the helm of the shuttle they would use to reach the Phylaxian resistance's stronghold. His face was set, his eyes hard with determination, but Elisara could see the flicker of concern beneath the surface. He was not a man easily moved, but even he knew that the road ahead would be treacherous. Ready? Marcus asked as she entered the shuttle bay. Elisara took one last look at the station, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Of her fallen empire, of the people she had once ruled, of the strength that had been shattered but not broken. She was ready. For the first time since her exile, she felt alive with purpose. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied, her voice low but confident. The shuttle doors closed behind them, and the engines hummed to life, propelling them out of the station and into the deep expanse of space. They would travel through sectors both known and unknown, moving carefully to avoid detection. The Zalaxian Empire was vast, and though they had the advantage of surprise, it would only last for so long. As they neared the coordinates of the Phylaxian resistance, Elisara felt her heart race. She had not been here in years, and the memories that flooded her were sharp and painful. She could still see the faces of the men and women who had once stood by her side, ready to fight and die for the empire they believed in. But she had abandoned them, or rather, the empire had abandoned her, and now she was the one returning, not as their queen, but as a woman who had lost everything and gained something new in its place. We're close, Marcus said, his voice a little tighter than before. I'm going to send the signal. Stay alert. Elisara nodded, her eyes fixed on the view screen. The stars outside seemed so distant, so unreachable, but for the first time they felt like a destination, a place where she could find her way back. She wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but she knew it was the only chance she had left. The shuttle dropped out of hyperspace with a shudder, and the barren moon that housed the Phylaxian resistance appeared on the screen. It was small, unremarkable from a distance, but Elisara knew the value of its hidden depths. The moon was covered in caves, tunnels, and fortified bunkers, a labyrinth designed to keep their resistance safe from the prying eyes of the Empire. Marcus initiated the landing sequence, and soon they were descending toward the surface. The landing pad was marked with a single, flickering beacon, an old symbol of the Phylaxian resistance. Elisara's pulse quickened. She had not set foot here in years, and though she had expected this moment, the weight of it still hit her. The shuttle doors opened and two figures stepped forward to greet them. Elisara's heart clenched as she recognized the first figure, a tall, slender woman with pale skin and dark, expressive eyes. It was Syria, the leader of the Phylaxian resistance. Her face was older, more weathered by the years of struggle, but her presence was still commanding. "Your Majesty," Syria said, her voice low but respectful. "It's an honor to see you again." Elisara stepped forward, her posture straight but her heart heavy with the memories of the past. "Syria, I never thought I would see you again. I thought," she stopped herself, shaking her head. "I thought you were all lost." Syria smiled, though it was bittersweet. "We never stopped believing in you, Elisara. Even after all these years." Marcus stepped beside Elisara, his expression unreadable. "We have more to discuss, but we need to move quickly. The Zalaxian Empire knows she's alive. We don't have much time before they come looking for her." Syria's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll move fast. The Empire has forgotten what it means to fear a queen. We will remind them." The weight of those words hung in the air as the resistance gathered. Old friends, old allies, people who had fought and bled for the cause, began to assemble, each one more determined than the last. Elisara felt the power of their presence, the fire that had burned in her own heart once upon a time, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to feel something other than sorrow. She was no longer the exiled queen. She was a leader once more. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.